Hello, croeso, and welcome to this Get the Chance interview with actor and director Eleri Jones. Eleri is a graduate of the University of Manchester and Drama Centre London. She's appeared in shows on stage and screen, but recently she has gone behind the scenes and is currently completing a traineeship with Theatre Clwyd in Mold as an assistant director. And it's a pleasure to be able to speak to her today. Hello, Eleri, how are you?
Hello, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad at all, thank you. I'd like to start just by asking you a little bit about the traineeship that you've been doing as an assistant director, and just to ask kind of how it came about and what's been involved in it, and have you enjoyed it? Just your general experience.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours, so I'll give you the short version. But yeah, so I was thinking about, I'd been acting for a few years, as you said, and obviously really enjoying it and kind of finding my feet with that in terms of the industry. And I guess I was always looking at things from a director's perspective, even when I wasn't one of those actors who like tells other actors what to do. I don't think I was that bad, but I was kind of always interested in that kind of perspective of directing. And I just never thought somebody like me would be able to do that. That didn't seem like there was a place for me in the industry like that. So I started getting a bit more kind of curious, and I was looking for stuff online, just sort of thinking, oh, I wonder whether I should do a course or what should I do? And then I remember just looking on Clwyd's Twitter and seeing this traineeship advertised. And what I really liked about it, which has kind of been one of the things since doing it that's provided me with kind of the biggest variety experience, has been the fact that you have a placement with every department in the theatre, from box office to finance to workshop, wardrobe, all of those different areas. And to me, that feels like the best way to understand what other people's jobs are, and to be able to, you know, with one day, hopefully the idea of maybe going into a leadership position myself, that would seem like a really good kind of grounding in finding out what everybody does and how all the different departments communicate and that sort of thing. So that was one of the things that really attracted me to it. And to quality as well. I mean, after years as a freelancer, having 18 months somewhere really felt like something that was quite attractive at the time. And thank the Lord I did, because nobody could have foreseen the last year, but it's meant that an 18 months traineeship, which was supposed to finish sort of this February, luckily because of the furlough scheme and because of the funding that the theatre's put in place, it's enabled me to sort of stay on for an extension as well. So I'm going to be staying on a little bit longer there as well, which is just been really amazing, to be honest. And also the move kind of over the last year, obviously the move to work, a lot of my previous experience had been in film and TV and screen media. So that's kind of come in handy, actually, which wasn't something that I was expecting, but it's meant that I've been able to sort of kind of combine the skills that I've learned at Clwyd with also my previous work experience, in order to sort of help with the live streaming, with the digital work, all of that kind of stuff. So it's been the best timing, really.
Yeah, it couldn't have come at a better time, really, in some respects. Have you been able to, obviously, talking about the furlough scheme, does that mean you were kind of furloughed for part of it, or have you been able to work kind of throughout the last 12 months?
So I have been furloughed for part of it, but there have kind of always been, you know, for example, the community work is such a huge part of what Clwyd do in the area. And there's been stuff that I really wanted to keep up with. So having been furloughed, I then kind of volunteered for a couple of little projects here and there as well, to just kind of keep that work ticking over. And I mean, it's really been, that scheme has really been a saviour, I think, for a lot of steady staff in theatres. Because, you know, with no income and no audiences, I don't know how else people would be expected to make money, hire out your space because the whole building is shut. You know, how are you supposed to make any money? So so I've been lucky enough to kind of, it's been a nice balance, really, because being on furlough has enabled me to do other kind of community projects for kind of unpaid work, you know, all that kind of stuff that enables me to sort of give something back. So I've kind of continued working throughout, really, even though I've been on furlough for some of it.
And has it changed your view of theatre, I suppose, the last 12 months? Like, it's one of the things that strikes me with Theatre Clwyd in particular is that it has really kind of even as it's been closed and the building's been unable to be open, it's kind of shown this whole other dimension to theatre that I'm not sure many people kind of recognised or knew that was perhaps there before. It was very underground in terms of its community work. Were you surprised, or is that what you kind of expected? Yeah, how has it kind of shaped or changed your view of theatre and its role, I guess, in the wider community?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. I think being at had already changed my view on that in terms of the social responsibility of theatres, you know, with all the cuts that have taken place over the last 10 years in terms of social welfare and in terms of, you know, the rise in the use of food banks and all that kind of stuff. I've always known that there is a real kind of gap in those. Like growing up, for me, there was youth centres, there was all these little parts of the community, all these little hubs, and I really feel like that's decreased massively in recent years, obviously because of the funding cuts and everything. And I think really theatre has kind of had to step up and plug that gap, and I think that's never been more evident than it has in the last 12 months. You know, as soon as lockdown was announced and everything shut, you know, the theatre went into overdrive, and many did, I know, across the country. But I really feel like the regional theatres have really come into their own in that sense, in terms of being that centre of the community. And, you know, the kind of creative engagement department at Clwyd were putting together creative packs to send out to children with materials, you know, delivering food bank parcels, delivering plants, delivering tomato plants, you know, all this kind of really amazing stuff. And I think that really, for me, has shown me the importance of kind of making an impact on a small scale. You're making a bigger impact on a fewer number of people, rather than trying to have, you know, online work is great, and it's really important as well that people have something to watch and enjoy and take their mind off things. But I think, you know, that big reach is all very well and good, but you need to have those kind of small impacts in the community in order to really make a difference, I think. So that's definitely something that I've kind of has highlighted that for me the last 12 months.
Yeah, so it's definitely the regional theatre has really kind of risen to the challenge, I suppose, in many ways. Is that fair to say?
It seems like it. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can only speak for this region really, but I mean, seeing the work that, you know, Slung Low and Allen Lane have done as well, and, you know, all the theatres across the country that have genuinely thought, what else can we do in this time? Okay, we can't make theatre, but what can we do? And I think that's something that makes me really proud to work at Clwyd, is that kind of attitude of, rather than just saying, let's just kind of batten down the hatches and wait for this all to be over, they've thought, okay, we can't do that, but what can we do? We've still got people, we've still got creativity, we've still got funding, you know, what can we be putting that towards for best use? And that feels good.
And I guess kind of sticking with kind of regional theatre, and the way the kind of pandemic's gone for kind of moving theatre online, and there's been the opportunity for a few regional theatres to kind of collaborate on Clwyd's latest production. I call it Clwyd's production, but it's all of these regional theatres' production.
I have a habit of doing the same thing.
Yeah, you want to be proud of your local theatre, really, don't you? But share the wealth. But yeah, it's allowed quite a few regional theatres to come together for this new production of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Can you tell us a little bit about the play itself and just your experience of that kind of collaborative process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's really interesting is that you suddenly feel like you've met lots of people from different theatres, but you haven't actually met them. You've just seen their face in a box. And I kind of think sometimes when I meet people in real life at some point, I don't know if I'll recognise them without a green box around their face. But definitely, I think working online in this way has actually obvious drawbacks, and it has its lack of kind of real world communication, but it has really opened the doors in terms of making it not mattering as much where you live and where you're based, and being able to connect with people. I can just jump on a Zoom meeting with somebody who's in Cirencester at the barn, and we can just have a 10-minute chat. And it feels so much more open, really. It doesn't feel as kind of London centric or as exclusive. And that, I think, has been a really positive thing to come out of the last 12 months. And as for The Picture of Dorian Gray, I was brought on at quite a late stage, so after the script had been kind of almost finalised. But it's a new adaptation, of course, of the original novel. It's a really interesting one to call it a play because it was written purposefully for the screen in a way, although there are definitely kind of theatrical elements to it. We made it in a theatre, and I'd be really interesting to kind of have that conversation with people who've seen it about what they thought was theatrical about it and what was kind of tending towards that screen medium, because it's kind of embracing and making use of all the ways that people tell each other stories nowadays, like TikTok and YouTube and all of those things, and about the persona that you can create, you know, online. It's funny how, and kind of a widely spoken about topic really, but how as our communication online increases, it almost feels like our worlds are getting smaller because we spend every day sitting in this tiny bit of space around a laptop and around a phone. And it's kind of, watching it last night, I kind of really realized the importance of not losing those outside connections as well, and, you know, the dangers that social media can have on our mental well-being.
Do you think that that is kind of the, I suppose, the landscape going forward for theatre, and I guess all art forms really, is this kind of hybrid physical and virtual kind of sitting side by side?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you will ever and should ever try and replace that live experience of sitting together in a room and having those kind of collective gasps and those moments of kind of joy that the audience share. And I don't think anything will ever replace that. But I do think that there is a responsibility to make sure that theatre is reaching people who don't feel safe to the theatre just yet. You know, just because theatres are opening, you know, I've seen obviously lots of productions being announced. It's really exciting that things are opening up again from next month, you know, but that doesn't mean that everybody will feel safe to come back straight away. And it's going to take a long time, I think, to recover from the last 12 months. And I think we still have a responsibility. I think it's about access really. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we're still creating work that is reachable for people who don't quite feel, they shouldn't miss out because they don't feel safe enough to come back yet. And I think I think the hybrid form kind of comes into its own really. And it's, you know, there have always been those elements of kind of projections and recorded parts of theatre, and I think it's just kind of going further towards the ever evolving world of virtual reality and all of that stuff as well. So I think it's an exciting place to be at, but I don't think it will ever replace the live experience, and I really hope not anyway.
Yeah, and you've sort of said already that kind of your previous skills have kind of helped a little bit in kind of this last 12 months. Did you have much of an opportunity to kind of use those skills for this production in particular? When you say you came quite late to the process, did you have an opportunity to kind of get involved in kind of the editing or anything like that, or what was your role in the production, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So so it's a funny one again because of this kind of hybrid way of working. Obviously, people who've worked across both theatre and film will know that an assistant director in theatre is very different to a first or a second AD, assistant director in film and TV. I'd had experience of both, and this was kind of a hybrid job in that sense as well, because we had Zoom rehearsals in the way that you wouldn't normally have that for a TV production, for example, but also then when it came to kind of starting to get into the preparation, like the pre-production week, my role, it all kind of just became a shoot really, even though it was theatrical in its kind of conception and elements of it creatively were theatrical. It gets to a point where you're filming it, and so you need to treat it like a film, otherwise your scheduling will be all over the place. So I suppose it's kind of a hybrid for me on this as well, but I would say that I was more of a first AD in terms of my job is to kind of plan out the shoot, schedule it. We were only using the instance where we had 2 actors present at the same time. Aside from that, it was all shooting with actors one by one, to keep everybody as safe as possible and to kind of minimize risks on everybody's health, of course, and things like that. So that makes the shoot quite complicated. It means that we ended up starting with all of Dorian's stuff, which is kind of the main framework of the story, but you're doing all of that in the first couple of days and there's no opportunity for pickups or reshoots or anything. That's it, you know, so it's kind of, there is a pressure in order to make sure you've got everything that you want and to, you know, to schedule it in with all the different kind of levels of makeup, things like that are happening. I shouldn't say too much. But yeah, there is, so my job kind of, I was obviously present, and then during the shoot, that means that I kind of run the floor, as it were. So I'm kind of calling what shots are happening next. I'm kind of marking everything with a clapperboard, you know, that kind of stuff as well. And I've always have to have an eye on what's happening next, because it's quite easy to lose your way, I think, when you're creative in what the shots look like and what you're kind of creating in the moment. It's really easy for the time to just slip away. So that really is the first AD's job, is to keep on top of the clock and make sure everybody's moving on when they should be. Or if we lose a bit of time here, how can we make that up later? And that's kind of the dialogue I'm having with myself all the time, really, on that. And yeah, and I think just generally being on set a lot and having camera experience and all that kind of stuff, I think it helps to understand the rhythm of what's happening on set and to understand everybody's individual jobs as well. I think that's really important that First AD has that.
Yeah, and the play is, as you've said, a kind of modern adaptation, which is all centered around social media. I'm guessing the themes of the novel are still there, and how do they kind of relate to this kind of modern day setting around social media?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? I mean, to be honest, I think sometimes adaptations can feel like adaptations just for the sake of it. But to me, this one really, as soon as I first read the script, I thought this feels like a natural translation, although we're not talking about portraits anymore, we're talking about images on a screen. And to be honest, I think the themes are very much there still. And I think it's, you know, the idea of kind of vanity and beauty and the presence. I suppose I can't, you know, I wasn't alive in that time, but I think, you know, there's always that kind of image. I think when you walk around like a historic property and you're looking at all these portraits of people and you look at them and you think that's how they wanted to be represented, you know, whether they actually looked like that. I think there's a disconnect between what people, you know, if you're getting somebody to, if you can paint a portrait of you, you wouldn't want to look like spotty and, you know, dark shadows, would you? You'd be like, paint me on a good day, you know? And I kind of think that theme of vanity and of beauty really carries so clearly and so well into the modern context of filters, of kind of presenting a version of yourself online. I really don't think it's that dissimilar, actually. It's just the methods of communication are different that we have now. But in terms of somebody, you know, making a deal, and in terms of somebody kind of being subject to that kind of physical scrutiny, you know, having a captivating aura and a captivating charm, you know, I feel like that's relatable to a lot of influencers and a lot of celebrities now. And I think that's not dissimilar from what Dorian experiences and as his fame online kind of grows and grows.
And what do you feel like the overall message is, or would you want people to kind of get from it, I guess? I've not seen it myself. It obviously just kind of came on yesterday, but early reviews that I've seen have kind of been very kind of sort of, they've seen the kind of, the message seems to be one of kind of being wary of kind of the negative sides of social media, I suppose. Yeah, what is the message that you sort of take from it yourself, or you'd want other people to take from it, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because I think, you know, I have family members kind of all around the world, and social media creates this beautiful opportunity to see what people are doing and to kind of keep in touch with people if they just had a baby, for example, you know, and you can't be kind of on the phone to people every minute of the day, and it's a quick way, isn't it, of checking in. It's like a shortcut to checking in with people and how they are and what they're doing, and all the positives are clear. You know, it's clear that it's helped me connected during this time. I think, as you said, really the danger is making sure that you stay in control of that, making sure that you are limiting, you know, it's not the real world, it's not reality, it's a construction of reality. And you know, if the balance of living in the real world, in the moment, in your surroundings, tips over into going down social media rabbit holes, you know, being on there for hours and time just passing without you realizing, I'm sure we've all done that kind of late at night at some point. I think it's about making sure that your connection to social media is not coming at the expense of your real world relationships, your friendships and your family connections. And no matter how much dopamine is released with each click and each like and people subscribing to your work, whatever you're putting out there, you know, it's really important to remember that that isn't real, you know, in a sense. That is constructed, and all of those platforms are constructed to psychologically addict us to those likes, to that feedback, to that positive affirmation. And I often see, you know, you can see so many examples of it now, can't you, that people think everybody's having a great time in lockdown, you know, people are posting photos of themselves and it all seems okay, and yet we know that most people are struggling. It is difficult, and I think it's too easy to slip into that feeling of feeling like it's only you that's difficult because everybody's online presence feels positive. And I think now more than ever, it's really important that we kind of stay in control of that and stay aware of that kind of duality of the reality that it creates.
This has been a really kind of big production that is going to probably have quite a big reach across the UK. But I also wanted to ask you about a more local project that you've been involved in with the North East Wales Archives, because I found the sort of series of Women Rediscovered really powerful in their own sort of ways, really. And just wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about that as a project, and yeah, can you just explain a little bit more for maybe anybody who hasn't seen them, what it involves and what it's about?
Thank you for watching. First ended up on BBC News for it, which is always a surprise, and that was on my mum's birthday, so that was good because that was the best present I could have ever arranged, which I didn't arrange. So Women Rediscovered was a series of films. Emma John, the writer who's part of the creative engagement department at Theatre Clwyd, had been collaborating with the archives for a while and had been looking at stories of real women and rural stories, you know, working class rural stories of normal women that lived. The archives is such an amazing treasure trove of all of those stories, and yet it kind of sometimes can feel quite inaccessible in terms of, you know, it's all on a page. You have to go there and actively dig through kind of reams and reams of paperwork. You know, of course, the staff are brilliant as well in terms of directing you towards something. But really the idea behind the project was to kind of bring some of those voices back to life and to help people re-engage with local stories and local women specifically. And so Emma created the scripts based on stories of real women. Some of them are specific women from history. Some of them are kind of combining a few different women's stories. For example, there's a piece about one of the widows from the Gresford colliery disaster, and that isn't necessarily pertaining to a specific woman with a specific husband who died. It's kind of more kind of taken from all of the articles about women's experience at the time, and he's created a character based on that. So there's a different level of kind of truth and imagination involved in that, but we had just sort of wanted to shed a light on, if those women were able to speak to us, what would they say, and how can we keep those stories of the past present for us, because there's stuff that we can learn from them. You know, that these women experienced loss and love and, you know, pandemics and all these things that we are experiencing now have been lived before by our ancestors. And if they have any advice for us or any kind of way through a difficult time, it felt like an appropriate moment to kind of give a voice back to those people and try and platform some local stories, some rural stories, which I think are often at the back of the queue, really.
Yeah, because I think particularly the Gresford one I found quite powerful actually, but again, like just a local story of a mining disaster that happened just down the road effectively, which I didn't actually realize, or I'd never kind of, I sort of knew about it, but didn't really realize the kind of impact, because I guess, again, Wales is quite sort of south-centric. It is that kind of thing, isn't it? That it's, you know, you have London-centric, but then in Wales there seems to be this focus on the south, and sort of stories of the north can kind of get a bit forgotten a little bit sometimes. So it was kind of quite surprising, I suppose, even to somebody like me in Northeast Wales to kind of hear about that story, I thought, oh wow, because you just think about it as a South Walian kind of thing and part of Welsh history from a South point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really common feeling up here as well. And you know, I think those stories, the only reason I'd ever heard of the Gresford colliery disaster was because my nan was 2 at the time, and she's still alive, luckily, which is amazing. So you know, she wasn't, obviously it wasn't in her living memory, but people talked about hearing the boom and talked about the impact that had on the communities around here. And I think as that generation sadly leaves us and moves on, you know, we are losing those first-hand accounts of those really pivotal moments in our area's history. And that's why the archives, and kind of especially bringing it to film, I think, you know, there is absolutely a place for it in the theatre. You know, I was lucky enough to work on Mould Riots as my first job at Clwyd back in 2019. But I think there is a permanence of film that really gives people an opportunity to engage with it and to come back to it and revisit it. And, you know, once you make a project, you know what it's like if you're lucky enough to have something else to go on to, that one sort of takes a sideline and you forget about, you know, the impact. But then somebody can send you a message 2 months later and say, I've just watched this and I thought it was so great. And I think there's something about committing it to the permanence of film that feels really important as well for the area. And like you said, I think, you know, I think the story, there's so much, you know, there's a huge wealth of stories in North Wales. And, you know, just because people are living ordinary lives or we're living ordinary lives doesn't mean they're not extraordinary in their own way. And I think there's something to be proud of to celebrate those lives as well. And I think that's something, you know, another series of those, or I'd love to work with the archives again on something else, because it really does feel like it's such an untapped resource for us as storytellers. You know, there's all this material, all these lives just there waiting for somebody to sort of open a box and discover it, and that feels quite exciting.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for that kind of inaugural kind of TV series kind of set in Northeast Wales. It seems to be sort of creeping around from kind of Cardiff and up to kind of mid Wales with like Hinterland, and then Northwest Wales with Hidden. And I'm just like waiting for that person to kind of come with a kind of a Northeast Walian kind of perspective, really. And you strike me as somebody who is kind of on the border, in that you've kind of had experience of kind of this area, but you've kind of spent some time down in London and Manchester and stuff. I just wanted to ask a little bit about your kind of journey into the arts and your experience kind of so far. Like, what have you always been interested in the arts? Like, what sparked your kind of interest in it?
Yeah, I guess without realizing, I mean, obviously it's that classic thing that female directors get where they're like, oh, you're so bossy, that really suits you, that job. So I guess that started off when I was a kid. I've kind of always been a border child, like you said. I grew up near Chester, but all my family are from Wrexham and Llangollen. So I never really had that concept of like England and Wales, I don't think, as a child. I kind of was just always backwards and forwards, and I didn't really realize until I was older that people started making jokes about like taking your passport to go to Wales, and I just kind of suddenly realized that is I just hadn't had any experience of that. So I guess a lot of the stuff, it's always been in my family, really, side of the family especially. They've always been part of like Kevin Operatic Society. You know, there's always been that creative flair there, and my mum especially had instilled that in me as kind of a means of expression. I think since I was a kid, I was always sort of performing stories for people or just entertaining people, and really enjoying that kind of, that how you can hook people into a story. And yeah, I suppose that's where it all started. Specifically, there was a moment when I saw George's Marvellous Medicine came to the Gateway Theatre in Chester. I can't remember, I must have been about 6. But there's a moment in that where there's a huge explosion and the granny goes through the roof. And it was an amazing moment, I think, of my early years. Trumps everything, trumps family weddings, trumps all of that. I was just so excited. And then on the afterwards, I saw the granny come out of stage door and I was like, Mum, she's not in the sky. And I think that was for me, I just was like, my mind was blown that that kind of magic could exist in front of your eyes without realizing, you know, I think film magic is a different type of magic, but you kind of, there's something about that live experience, isn't there, in terms of seeing that in front of you and really feeling like you were in the right place at the right time to have that special moment with this group as well. And yeah, I think that's a very long way of saying yes. I think I have always been interested in it. I remember when I was thinking about going to uni and I was looking at psychology courses, I was really interested in that as well. And there was a bit of a kind of thing in my family of like, you know, do something proper in terms of have something you can fall back on if the whole artist thing doesn't work out. So I just changed my UCAS application to drama and didn't really tell anybody at the time. Then was like, I got into Manchester for drama. Everyone was like, what? So I think I've gone my own way with it in that sense. And even at Manchester, I really fell in love with film there. That was where that kind of really started for me. And you know, even now I kind of think, you know, especially like we've been talking a lot about the virtual side of theatre and the hybrid nature, it's kind of direction that's going in, and I don't really want to choose. I don't think you should have to, in terms of, you know, the monologues for Women Rediscovered, obviously they were kind of very much just a filmed monologue, but we managed to shoot all 4 of them in one day, you know, and you wouldn't be able to do that if you were just shooting them for film and you had these big cuts to make and all of that kind of stuff. So I think there is a real beauty in taking elements from both and kind of combining them and seeing what that new kind of art form is. So for me, I think I'm firmly still divided between the two, and I won't choose.
Yeah, and I don't think it should be a choice, really, should it? It is that we're creatives, and I think for an industry that's it's always uncertain, isn't it? You never know where the next kind of thing is going to come from, and so to have all of these strings to your bow is probably actually an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, we're used to adapting, aren't we, as creatives, like you said, you know, we're used to, that's especially what the last year has shown as well, you know, so many brilliant actors and writers and directors and designers and all of those people that I know have had to branch out, and they've had to find other ways to make money and find other ways to use their skills. And, you know, it makes me feel proud really to be part of the industry that we're in, because it really is, you know, it's got so, I mean, it's one of those things they say like transferable skills, isn't it? That's on your CV. But I genuinely think, you know, there is so much value in the skills that we have learned in order to be able to with each other and to be able to tell stories and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think like you said, it's shouldn't have to be a choice, and there are plenty of ways that we can still, even if theatres stay shut for a while. I mean, I really hope things are opening back up again now. But it's kind of shown us, I kind of felt a bit funny yesterday when it was the year anniversary, wasn't it, of everything closing, and there was all this stuff on social media saying, you know, it's been a year since theatres closed. And I was thinking, I don't know many that have closed. You know, the buildings were closed, but our involvement in making things and speaking to the community hasn't stopped ever. And it feels a bit kind of reductive to say they closed and that was it. And I understand the message in terms of we miss being in a theatre, we miss watching a live performance, but I think there is something in kind of appreciating and embracing those people who've worked tirelessly for the last year, who haven't had any furlough, who haven't had a break, who've just kept continuously working all the way through to make sure people have got something to engage with. I think it's a good thing that we celebrate that as well.
And kind of going forward, do you think that the kind of environment as it is now will enable more people to kind of have that kind of freedom or accessibility to kind of have a career in the arts or be involved in the arts that doesn't kind of involve having to travel down to London? Yeah, because it strikes me that it's quite London centric before, and whereas there seems to be kind of this, I don't know, flexibility now that maybe going forward that people might be able to have that, you know, I don't know what your long-term plans are, but you know, if you wanted, for example, to stay in North East Wales, that you would perhaps have that opportunity a bit more now than maybe you had before.
I would like to think so. I would definitely like to think that has been a change in terms of perhaps from now on, pre-production or rehearsals can take place with people working from home, to a certain extent before you need to obviously start blocking things, but that you can do those early kind of development work on a script, or you can do those early parts of the process separately, and at least reducing the impact on the environment, you're reducing the cost, and then when you then do get into a room with people are then able to travel and stay places, in the same way that we all do for kind of going on tour, all those different things. I would really, really like to think that it has opened things up to the regions and rurally as well. I think there will always be a centre in London, in Cardiff, in terms of the sheer amount of work being made. If you think about even kind of Theatre Clwyd with its amazing production produces and those in a year, that is just one theatre in this entire area that is producing work, not just receiving house. And there is always going to be 20, 30 times that in a city. So you're always going to have that proportion of jobs. So you might have, you have got work in this area, but you've got more people fighting for that work if they're staying put in terms of where they live. And I think London is kind of an experience in itself. Like for me, it wasn't somewhere I went just because I didn't think there was work around here. It was because I wanted to go and what that landscape was like and see if I could find a place there. And luckily made lots of really amazing friends and contacts that have continued to kind of sustain me through this period as well. But I do think that things have changed, and I hope they have changed, because there has been, such a bias really in terms of London-centric, capital city-centric work, and not wanting to engage with artists from outside, I think has been a problem for years and years and years. So I really hope that something like that, and I certainly would be, unless there's a huge cost implication and I'm having to fly somebody from Denmark, I don't know, but unless there's a huge cost implication like that, I would certainly never be kind of considering not working with somebody because of where they're from. I would always try and judge it on merit and in terms of what they have to say.
And I guess a more general question really, what excites you about the arts in Wales right now and going forward, and what is there anything that you would or feel needs to change? Is there one thing that you would kind of like to see change in particular?
Wow, that's a really big question. Yeah, I mean, lots of things excite me, genuinely. Lots of things excite me about coming back to Wales and finding out. I just didn't even know all of the little centres that were happening, since I'd left, however many years ago, back here, and finding like T-Palb and Wrexham, finding these amazing little cultural hubs that have popped up in the time that I've been away. That is so exciting, that new things are emerging, new companies are emerging, new buildings, new spaces for people, all the different groups in North Wales particularly. I just find it feels like there's a collective power there, I think, and a collective voice. And I've found it easier to engage with people, other artists in North Wales, just because we have something in common, which is Wales. It's a really nice conversation, and I think I would always look favourably on working with Welsh artists, because it's a brave thing to stay here and not be drawn to the city, and not be drawn into kind of moving to England, which is something that has always been seen as there's the opportunity. I think that's been a couple of generations that things have been like that we move. Anybody who goes to university tends to move away from Wales to try and broaden their horizons, but it's really about encouraging those people back and making sure that we don't lose the next generation of creatives and artists just to those bigger cities. So I think there's a lot of exciting things happening, and I think especially amazing organisations like Film Cymru are really prioritising North Wales stories, like you said. I'm sure that TV series won't be too far off. So I think it really does feel like there is a focus and a discovery of all of the beautiful things that we have to offer up here, and I hope that continues. I think there is big room for change, I think, in the industry as a whole, and I think that's reflected in Wales as well. And I think, something that I started learning Welsh. I'd never spoken Welsh as a child. None of my Welsh family speak Welsh at all. I started learning Welsh at Clwyd and finding it really difficult, actually, because if you're not speaking it, it's like anything, isn't it? You don't have the chance to practice it. And I would really love to see the encouragement of that in the industry, because I feel like there are, there's fluent Welsh speakers who've grown up with it all their lives, people who are kind of trying to learn, but you never really get past that basic conversational level unless you can go into rehearsal rooms or see a production that's captioned. You know, there are kind of that, I think there's a real kind of gap in that, in terms of encouraging the Welsh language and being able to make things accessible to learners as well. So I think I would really love to see kind of more productions that embrace that and encourage learners to engage in Welsh as well.
Final question, just kind of because Tamara Harvey, the artistic director at Clwyd, is just such a kind of leading and inspirational figure, and I just kind of want to indulge you a little bit and just ask, like, what has been your experience of working with her, and what have you learned from her that you will kind of take forward after this or beyond this traineeship?
So much, really. Genuinely, she's probably going to watch this and be like,
yeah, I'm assuming that it's all positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really think, you know, I think seeing somebody juggle being a mother and being an artistic director is really inspiring, genuinely. And I think it's not easy to try and do a good job at both. And, you know, we can all be hard on ourselves when we don't get the balance quite right. But I think Tamara's a really amazing example of somebody who didn't feel that, you know, there's a lot of pressure on women when you get to a certain age of making that choice between career and children, and even now, which is a crazy conversation to still be having in 2021. But, you know, to say, no, I'm doing both and I'm sticking to it and I'll give it my best shot, you know, I think it's really, really inspiring. And I think working with her and seeing kind of the traineeship has given me an amazing access to seeing things like board meetings, as well as in a rehearsal room, as well as, you know, all these different settings where as an artistic director, you're expected to just jump from one to the other and kind of take it all in your stride. And then the next minute you're on stage each, and then the next minute you're going back into a meeting, you know, and it's kind of, it's wearing all those different hats. And I think that's what I've enjoyed most about working with Tamara, is seeing her ability to just do all that and make it look so effortless when I know how much work that takes in order to keep on top of all of those different kind of strains of the job. And then really seeing that in Dorian Gray, with actually having that opportunity to just kind of take off your artistic director hat and just step into the director's world, you know, fully immersed in that, and to work with her creatively has been a real blessing as well. It was a really amazing experience. All good.
Great, I'm glad to hear it. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to chat to me. It's been really great, interesting, stimulating conversation.
Oh, good. I'm glad I've offered you something. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been great. So good luck with Dorian Gray, with the rest of your time at Clwyd, and hopefully there'll be big things ahead.
Thank you. I hope so. And let me know what you think of doing it as well. I'd love to know what you think.
Absolutely. I will watch it hopefully when I have time next week. So yeah, that's great. Thank you, Eleri.
Thanks, Gareth.